The following video is brought to you by Displate. Ancestors: The Humankind Odyssey is an open-world tactical action squad-based Death Stranding-like with Breath of the Wild-style climbing and navigation and polyamory mechanics. Although, when timing up the two biggest game releases from last year that were about hiking babies across long distances to save the human race, Ancestors actually beats Death Stranding by a good 3 months. Which I guess makes Death Stranding the second game in the Strand genre, or the Ancestors genre? In either case, neither game plays quite like anything else I've ever played, and it is kind of uncanny that they both came out so close to each other, but it's also been about a decade since Far Cry 3 established how open-world action games should go, and these things take 4 to 5 years to make. Both games feel like what happens when a lot of bottled-up creative energy fighting that establishment finally gets let loose. Ancestors depicts the survivalist struggles of proto-human primates on their way to becoming whatever accident of evolution is holding the controller. It's a third-person action game in which you control one character only in increments, switching from ape to ape as the situation dictates, with your game over screen from a death triggering a sequence where you're going to play as a child who grows up to inherit the skills taught to you by the parents you were playing as earlier. That's how it handles the Dark Souls retrieval system. You don't get XP unless you have a child nearby watching you and learning. And if you die, you have to go back and rescue that child, and hopefully they'll live to adulthood. Within one generation of playable characters, you can level up certain skills, habits, calls, and commands, and even bodily tolerances that don't just buff up your ape's HP and stamina and such, but also expand the control scheme and the social efficiency of your entire clan. You want to be making as many of those babies as possible because each one rolls a chance for a beneficial mutation slot that more of those upgrades can slide into than the last. Eventually, you press a button, the screen fades to black and tells you 15 years have passed, and then you're playing as the next generation of kids. Eventually, you'll press a different button, then the screen fades to black and tells you 15 million years have passed, and you're playing as a whole different species. This makes a clear explanation of, and an enjoyably exaggerated gamification of, the differences between learned skills, inherited traits, and the evolved environmental adaptations built into an animal's body. The verbs this game has you committing to are absolutely bonkers. There is a mate button. There is an ooh ooh ah ah button. There is a rationalize your surroundings to face your fears button. But to try and keep from spoiling too much of a game where most of the story is the learning curve, there actually is a kind of main quest given by whatever god it is who's stamping these new objectives on the top of the screen. Your control of these apes means that they're gonna have some kind of unerring attraction to wander towards completing those objectives, which will lead them on a grand adventure across an enormous and gorgeously rendered open-world Africa map teeming with wildlife, one that will steer them deeper and deeper into environments they were evidently not adapted for. The canopies of a thick jungle gradually clear out, flatten out, and dry out, despite the constant need to satisfy 3 very demanding eat, sleep, and drink meters. One of the most fascinating decisions that'll eventually happen when climbing this curve, and my god, this game is never not fascinating, are moments where you'll choose whether or not you want to live out the struggles of learning to adapt to a new environment as a species evidently built for the previous one, or fan out in the previous biome and live a few generations first to buff up and prepare. Whatever this Metacritic score says right now does not reflect the same game I've been playing for the past couple months. It is still difficult, obtuse, and reliant on trial and error, as the 4 out of 10 GameSpot review describes, but the level of on-screen feedback and tutorial messages have been bumped up considerably, and that might have been the right call. Some features that I just described that are so important to making this work were added in after a patch, 4 months after launch, which speaks to the problems of both releasing games too early and just how obsolete permanent review scores have become in the age of post-launch support. I don't even know if this video even counts as a review or not, because those don't usually include quotes from the lead gameplay designer about what the hell happened. So, for what it's worth, the review seemed pretty harsh on the game for difficulty quirks that I adapted to pretty easily. Has the current version significantly changed since then, or do you think something could have gone differently on launch, or was a game this weird just always bound for low scores?
The art of the game was the same. I mean, we adapt some issues based on fans' reaction, which is a good thing, I think. But the art of the game, the core mechanics are still the same. Maybe 6 months prior launch, I was just ended a PlayStation with Ancestors, and I realized, man, learning to play this game is like learning a music instrument. If you never play a fiddle in your life before being able to perform, there's so many stuff you need, not only control, but philosophy. Of course, it's fun to be loved. It's fun to be liked. It's fun to have great reviews so we can, hey, okay, I have recognition, but the better recognition that we've gotten so far is from the community that gets it. And that's it for me. After that, the Metacritic score, I don't care. I mean, we just don't care because on Reddit, on Discord, we receive fan letters telling us, thank you for giving us such a great game. There's so many stories that I've experienced. There's so many feeling of accomplishment that I've been able to live with that game. This is why we make games.
That was Marc-André Deblois, not to be confused with Assassin's Creed co-creator Patrice Desilets, who you usually see quoted and stamped on the box. But they've both been working together for decades, going back to Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, the original Ubisoft game about climbing all over everything in a historical setting. Your ape ancestor and ancestors sure is good at climbing, but at the start, that's about all they're good at. This game makes the radical decision of locking basic controls, specifically a lot of grasping and item switching that you'd expect your character to be doing with their hands, behind an upgrade tree that constantly reminds you of just how much these hands of yours, these legs of yours, and this brain of yours separates us from the animals. How challenging was it to make decisions as developers to limit the elegance of the player's control and HUD for the sake of the themes, like how getting your ape to hold 2 items at once or being able to manipulate them while moving is something that has to get unlocked down an upgrade tree?
It was a constant challenge to design this game because as a developer, but also as a gamer, you don't realize how much reflex you've picked up decades ago, and that game put every reflex on the line, and we ask ourselves, why are we doing stuff like that? Why should we continue to do stuff like that? This game could have been designed so much easier if we had decided, for example, to gate the player's progress. I have a 9-year-old son, and I remember very clearly, when kids are young, you play peekaboo, peekaboo, and until the moment where you hide yourself, and instead of waiting for you to open your hand, he's just doing that. Because in that moment, he learned about 3D space. He learned that he doesn't have to wait for me, he just needs to lean on, and he will see me. When you have a kid, you witness almost every day how we grow, how we unlock skills.
There's a lot of real-life science that went into the game, and if last year's Outer Wilds was a big playable astrophysics lesson, then last year's Ancestors is a big playable anthropology lesson. You make your long-term level-ups while going to sleep to reflect the real-life connection between a healthy sleeping schedule, a healthy thyroid gland, and a healthy long-term memory. One thing I think I gleaned from my quick intro to Anthropology class that actually did help me out a lot in this game was to stay the hell off the ground. Apparently a lot of the human body suggests that a lot of our primate ancestors spent their entire lives up in the trees. So that's your primary defense mechanism. Leap up in the trees. It's safer up there. That's your element. You also have an actual dopamine meter that helps break you through new territory gated off by an actual fear of the unknown, which is refilled by doing a kind of Metroid Prime scanning routine to get your ape to concentrate on what they're seeing and try to think really hard about it and commit it to memory. And this actually pulls from the same stamina meter as does running and jumping. Rearranging your anatomy to direct more energy towards the brain instead is a late game unlock. It's a shock to see things like walking, digestion, panting under heat, and even using your brain to be something that takes away from stamina.
The way you gain dopamine in the game also is scientifically connected. Every social interaction you have when you groom people, it's linked to a dopaminergic pathway in the brain that is linked to social experience. There's another pathway in our brain that is linked to experience. When you learn something or when you resolve a problem, that's fire up neuron in the brain that creates dopamine. Our brain really works that way.
The social behavior of your hominid apes is something that at first struck me as probably unrealistic. There's no intra-species fighting. Outsiders join your clan very, very easily, and nobody fights over mates. They all swap mates. They all raise each other's kids together, which all seems a little more idyllic than the chest-beating violence that gorillas and chimpanzees are known for. But as it turns out, I was thinking of the wrong apes. They modeled the social systems after bonobo behavior instead. Bonobos and chimpanzees are mankind's currently closest cousins, and while chimpanzees are famous for being evil little bastards, bonobos are famous for being horny little bastards.
They use sex as a fight diffuser amongst a clan. It doesn't matter if it's male on male or female on female or male on female. It's sex. Sex is it's a way for them to diffuse the social tension. It's not about being idyllic as a vision. It's more like we postulate from what we can see from actual great apes, what could have been in the past. It's only a matter of how do you decide to depict the human race. It's easy to imagine us 5 million years ago at wars, but at the same time, scientific says that there's no need for war in an environment where there is no sedentarity. Sedentarity brings a closeness to your resource, puts a vulnerability on how you control the environment, because if the water runs dry, the whole village will be thirsty. If the crops are stolen or destroyed, everybody will starve. But sedentarity was not even in the plan 2 million years ago. It was a self-sustained nomad system where the population was like the rest of the animal world. If there's too much people for less food, people will die to the point where the system will be in equilibrium.
And for the most part, the game actually plays like that. Resources are constantly diminishing and pushing you to move, and predators are in that path. The hunger and thirst meters are depleting far faster than any experience you could relate to in real life and even most other survival games, and I eventually got into the routine of just straight up moving the whole clan at once throughout every single day to a new spot to sleep under a different sky every single night. And what helps pace the game so well is this juggling act between an idyllic and a brutal vision of our most distant past. You're plucking food straight off the trees and sleeping on the grass under the open stars wherever you damn well please, but that's still the result of a brutal rush against exposure to the elements. There's no way in hell these apes would have had the free time to stop and think about thinking long enough to start making art and stuff. And that's where the implications behind the game start getting straight up theological. I mentioned Breath of the Wild earlier because of a kind of emergent gameplay loop, a very well-paced one at that, where you climb up almost any surface to go through a routine of getting a pretty view, noticing a point of interest in the distance, then climbing back down and running into emergent systems-driven trouble along the way. But because of how demanding those survival meters are, you're not just rewarded with a pretty sight up there, but rather a long-term survival plan based on the natural geography you're looking at. reading into the directions the rivers flow based on where the sun's setting and the elevation of mountains that help you predict what you can't see over that horizon to try and find where the next oasis of fresh water could be, and maybe that is why landscapes of mountains and rivers look so beautiful. Or maybe I'm just reading too deep into it. I mentioned this being a squad-based tactical action game because if you play it like a Rainbow Six game, if you pretend that you're Tom Clancy's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, that difficulty curve absolutely flips upside down. The only thing scarier than an angry monkey is an angry monkey with a pointy stick. And the only thing scarier than an angry monkey with a pointy stick is 8 angry monkeys with pointy sticks marching in a tactical V-line formation. The experience of leveling up enough to become the ultimate hunter of a wilderness survival game has absolutely, positively never felt more hard-won, satisfying, and powerful than it does here. You begin the game as a helpless animal of prey. Your interface, your controls, and the mechanics all evoke the feeling of being far less capable than the very hands that are holding the controller. But at some point in the game, it's not going to tell you in text, and it's not going to be spelled out to you in the upgrade tree, it's going to happen in your head. After enough hours spent empathizing with these vividly animated animals, after tens of hours sharing a headspace with them and watching them grow up and develop, you're eventually going to witness a moment that strikes you as the one that starts blurring the line between them and us. And that's the setting and the mystery that fuels ancient mythology. From Gilgamesh to Genesis to Achilles and Odysseus, it's all expressions of what it means to be a human in control of one's actions and the natural world controlled by the gods. Creation myths don't just provide an exciting answer to where we all come from, but also to what kind of thinking and behavior separates humans from animals. And is that really the kind of narrative they wanted to walk players through? Is Ancestors a modern version of, a playable version of a creation myth? Just as much as it's a playable anthropology lesson, or am I just reading too much into this?
The answer I would give is outside of any intention that we had with Ancestors. You know what I mean?
Was there any controversy faced by the dev team from religious groups?
Not that I'm aware of, to be honest. It's funny because the most stuff I'm aware of is some chatter on commentary section on YouTube video about creationists. There was not a religious backslash at all. We stay close to what science was able to relatively put precisely in a time frame. If we accept that 10 million years ago they were there, what could have happened to simulate their existence, their experience, to reach us today? And that's where we add our reflection, our thought, and we focus on that. If from that people try to read more, it's up to them. I mean, if I read a book that opens my mind to a lot of new possibilities, that doesn't mean that the author of the books thought about that. When you create art form, when you create something, after that, the way it's received, it's not up to you anymore. If people use the game to think about where we come from and re-question their belief, if they do that in a way that will make them a better person and make them take better decisions in the future, good. I'm glad for them, you know?
When it comes to death of the author, there is probably no other story in human history more open to interpretation than this one. This is the second game within the past year that I've played that takes a seriously sourced, scientifically minded step to imagine what it would be like witnessing an answer to some of the most impossible questions of them all. The past 2 years have seen some excellent open-world action games come out with technically less violence than most video games, but with more existential dread than most works of art. Games like Subnautica, Death Stranding, Outer Wilds, and Ancestors are able to explore that foundational Bronze Age struggle between man versus nature to a new level. In the future, will they be seen as a trend, or as the natural evolution of the open-world survival game genre as a whole? But there's one last thing I'd like to do before we go, and that is break character for a word from our sponsor. Check out Displate. It's from Displace, called Displate. They make metal posters you just can't hate. Classy art with minimal space, just what I need to spruce up Displace. Hit your friends with shock and awe. The magnets snap them onto almost any wall. It's just sticky paper that doesn't leave a scrawl. Proceeds go to licensed fans and artists who beautified Dark Souls, Zelda, and the TARDIS. So there's no shame if it's from games. Chances are you will recognize a few of these names. Plus, every purchase plants a tree, and these gorgeous landscapes with horses, those ones are for me. So below this video, you'll find this link. Click it, follow it, give it a think. 800,000 options are available for you to ornate. Oh my god, that's so great. So thanks again to our sponsor, Displate.
Everyone loves Pogo. Idiot Gamer called Pogo the best spring and simian game since bouncing bananas. Buy the game Pogo the Monkey today.